Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 11th chapter in the book of Ecclesiastes. Here we learn some of Solomon's business oriented wisdom, and then it closes with a call to enjoy life, particularly in the youth. But the section we most recently covered was the 10th chapter, the 5th through the 20th verse, and it has a lot to say about the ironies of life. The first of which is that Solomon is a king, and as such, he writes this in verse 6. A great evil in verse 5. Folly is put in many heights, while the rich sit in a humble place. What he's talking about is mediocre men elevated to positions of prominence, while the rich are debased and degraded to the seat of the fools. They are humbled while the fool is exalted. That is an inversion of the principles of meritocracy, according to which any system of government, be it democratic or monarchical, has to function on the principles of meritocracy. The most competent, trustworthy, capable individuals have to be put in the correct places, because a kingdom running is comparable to the building of a puzzle, and the king's job is to put all the pieces together in a way that makes sense and has coherence and meanings and accomplishes a vision. He talks about servants on horses, while rulers are walking around as though they were servants. So this is another irony of life, also an inversion of Solomon's socioeconomic order. He who digs a pit falls into it, verse 8. So, he who lives by the sword dies by the sword. So if you live your life to tempt and ensnare and trap others, eventually and inevitably one day you will set foot in the very pit that you dug for others, and you will fall into it, and you will be defeated by your own design. So violence does not pay, putting people down and drawing them into pits and wells is no way to live at all. It actually ends in death. And then he talks about people quarrying stones and splitting woods being injured on the job, even though these are trained professionals. But he has much to say. Now, wisdom literature in general has much to say about words and language. So verses 12 through 14, words of a wise man's mouth show grace, but the lips of fools swallow him up. Not only do our words show grace, but they impart grace, they embody grace. Words become manifest realities. We can speak realities into existence, and if our words are wise and gracious, then we can impart grace unto others. But the lips of a fool is self-destructive. They live to destroy themselves. In the same irony of one who digs a pit falling into it, the fool who speaks maliciously with destructive intent is ultimately accomplishing their own self-destructing. No good can come from a fool talking or listening to them. The beginning of the words of his mouth is foolishness, and the end his talk is as wicked as madness. So he describes an escalation and a progression of a foolish assumption. It begins in foolishness and then it ends in wicked madness. Madness is a more deranged state of mind than mere folly, but wicked madness is the worst combination of factors that can happen. So from foolish foundation spring wicked madness. This is an avoidable extreme that the foolish are not immune to, but the wise hopefully should know better. And the fool increases words. A man knows not what shall come to be, and who declares to him what shall be after him. So there's a semicolon. Prior to it, it connects. The fool increases in words. Fools talk a lot but say very little. Foolishness by its very nature is verbose. They say much, but they talk much, but they don't say a lot substantially. And to paraphrase Plato, the Greek philosopher, a wise man talks because he has something to say. A fool talks because they have to say something. So the fool is governed by the impulse and compulsion to broadcast and advertise itself through sheer verbosity, but they're talking a whole lot, but they're saying next to nothing at all. And then this is part of the uncertainties of life that we must contend with and live with. We do not know the future. All we have is the present, and the past is set in stone, and we don't know what will happen to us after us on the earth, and we cannot claim with infallible certainty that there is a life after life, an afterlife. This is one of the things we accept by faith, as though Solomon fluctuates between the doubtful, the skeptic, the agnostic, the rationalistic, the secularist, the humanist, but he does. It is all balanced by by a faithful perspective. So from this plethora of perspectives spring from a single mind, Solomon has the experimental ethos, which categorically considers wisdom's antitheses and all these things. But verse 16, this returns to the theme of rulership. Remember, Solomon is a king as well as a sage. Woe to you, O land, when your king is a youth, and your rulers feast in the morning. Solomon was a youth, but youth is not, it is a reference to immaturity. He was certainly mature beyond his years when he is described as such. He describes himself, he's as a self-described youth in the most biographically significant moment of his life when he is 19 years old, recently ascended to the throne with his power firmly consolidated, and after much slaughtering and sacrifice, he says he is giving a blank slate of whatever his desires are. In such a, what we would ask in such a situation is a revelation of our character. Solomon was wise enough to recognize his vacancy of wisdom. It would be an oversimplification to suggest that he had no wisdom to begin with before the supernatural endowment which made him without precedent, without parallel, without rival, and without equal in wisdom. But he was a youth and his inexperience. But he's talking about now, the nature of hereditary monarchy is the eldest patriarch of the family is elevated to the throne. So King Josiah, he was 8 years old. The son of Amnon, the son of Manasseh, was 8 years old, and he was a youth, but he ended up ruling wisely, especially when he came into age and started exercising control. But it is dangerous to have an immature, and Rehoboam was 41 years old when he inherited the throne, but he was much less mature than his father was at 19 years old in his moment of weakness. So it's a dangerous thing to have power and immaturity combined in rulers who are self-serving creatures who exist to feast off the fat of the land, just gluttonous, Epicurean, sensualist, carnal creatures. No good can come from that. Blessed are you, O land, when your king is the son of nobles, and your rulers feast in due season for strength and not drunkenness. So from the woe, the announcement of a cursing springs the opposite, a blessing, a beatitude, and it is a blessing inasmuch as it is a curse or a woe unto the land whose king is unqualified to exercise royal responsibility. It is a blessing when your king fits that description. He has the job credentials, and they have the appropriate attitude towards feasting. They feast to strength. We have to exist in the physical world, and so we have to eat to sustain ourselves, to give us the strength to endure. But to be drunkenness is a fatal combination, especially in people who exercise offices of responsibility, because alcohol, no matter how smart or intelligent or moral you are, it will make you a less responsible human being. So Isaiah says something in the 5th chapter of the book which bears his name, woe unto those who he's indicting the rulers, religious and secular, of Judah, who wake up in the morning and get drunk first thing and brag about it all. Because we ran over the 30-minute mark, we didn't exegete the 20th verse of the 10th chapter in this lesson's predecessor. We just read it out loud. We're going to begin the lesson itself, even though we're going to title this Ecclesiastes 11. The actual exegesis begins in the verse we did not cover because of time, space allowance. Do not curse the king, even in your thought. Do not curse the rich, even in your bedroom. For a bird of the heavens conveys the voice, and a bird of flight makes the matter known. This verse is the origin of the expression, I heard it from a bird. Birds cannot literally talk, but Solomon is cautioning against, he's not talking about a bird, he's talking about just don't even think the idea of criticizing or cursing the king. Solomon is a creature of his culture and system of government, and to curse a king would have been, Shammai, one of the 3 men that Solomon executed, cursed his father David. And David could not, he swore that he would not kill him, but Solomon's hands were clean, so he had the moral high ground to kill Joab, who had polluted the land with his murders, but David was not absolved because he had used Joab to murder Uriah, the rival of his affection. But no matter how private, no matter how secluded, don't even think it, don't even say it out loud, even when you think you are alone, because that there is a bird that can relay the message, not a literal bird, but if you think thoughts, they just might be known. And you don't want these curses to be known for a monarch, because that could be fatal and dangerous. 11th chapter, first verse, send out your bread on the face of the waters, for after many days you shall find it. The reward is impossible in the absence of risk. That does not mean we are automatically entitled to expect a reward if we take a risk, but calculated risks are conducive to wise business practices, and the risk is to take it on the waters. Bread is something that can mean more than just mere bread. And the waters, the Hebrews were the Hebrew people, the Israelite nation, were a sea-bordering people, but they were not a seafaring people. But it was during the reign of King Solomon, whose friendship, the covenantal friendship that he inherited and perpetuated from his father David with Hiram, the king of Tyre to the north. The Phoenicians were a seafaring people, and Solomon utilized their expertise, and the bulk of his trade appears to be on the Red Sea, and the territorial expansion of Israel was at its greatest during his reign. So he did. Now every 3 years, we read of in Kings 10:22, the ship came returning all these goods that were listed in that chapter and verse. And so he lived to tell the tale of the proof of sending your bread on the face of the water, importing and exporting through navigational trade. And the Jewish nation was mercantile in ways that they were not before or since under his reign. Give a portion to 7 and also to 8, for you do not know what evil might be on the earth. If it is in your power to provide, be generous while you can, because you never know. Time and chance happen to everyone, the wise and the foolish, and the righteous and the wicked alike. So if you are hoarding your provisions and not spreading the wealth, you yourself may become dependent on the generosities of others. So be generous, generously giving. It is more blessed to give than receive. We read of in the New Testament, Acts 20:35, which is one of the statements underlined in red. It is the words, the oral tradition of Jesus as perpetuated by Paul. But, because the risk and the uncertainties of the future create risks, and we don't know what can happen to us. So we may be rich today and yet poor tomorrow and beggarly. We can have a radical revolutionary reversal of fortunes. We just don't know that. So give when it is in your power to give what you can while you can and because you can. If the clouds are filled with rains, they empty themselves upon the earth. And if a tree falls to the south or north, in the place where the tree falls, there it is. Solomon makes scientific statements throughout the book of Ecclesiastes. Beginning in the first chapter, he progresses from the scientist to the historians. He notes the natural phenomenons, the coming and going, the pattern of flux, which is imprisoned in a pattern of permanence. So here, this is a scientifically sound statement. If clouds are filled with rain, if they are clouds exist from evaporated water, and then one day, if they are evaporated to the point of having to release itself to replenish the earth, then they will do precisely that. This is the laws of physics. That is the way that clouds are made, and it is the way that God made them. And if a tree falls, there's no movement in a tree to begin with. So wherever it falls, there it is, and that's just a fact of science. He who watches the wind does not sow, and he who looks at the cloud does not reap. Now, that does not suggest that we should not watch the wind and not sow, but we should not watch the wind to the exclusion of sowing, or look at the clouds to the exclusion of reaping. Both, if a farmer wants nature to work for them, they must work with nature as it is. But what he's talking about is, just have the balance and don't exclude one to the other. If you wait for the perfect conditions will never manifest. So there is no perfect conditions, either physically or spiritually. If we had to wait for the perfect Bible study, we would never. If we had to join the perfect church, we would never join. And if we had to, perform the perfect ministry, we would never get the wheels in motion where we are. So do not waste time waiting for perfect conditions, growing inactive and idle and destructive in the process of your lack of aggressive initiative pursuit. Pursuit taken of the aggressive and assertive initiative. We have to make the most of opportunities as they come and not, squander the good opportunities because they could be slightly improved or slightly more perfect. Perfect conditions, ideal conditions do not exist, and wisdom consists in recognizing and respecting reality as it is and not as we would like it to be. As you do not know what the way of the wind, or how the bones grow in the wombs of her who is with child, so you do not know the works of God who makes all. These are incomprehensible mysteries of life which actually necessitate faith. There is so much beyond our power to comprehend, far more control. And so the way of the wind, he mentions this, it comes from the east to the west, I think, or north to the south in 1:6. Actually, it's the north of the south. But the way of the wind, no one can control it, no one can contain it, no one can predict it, no one can understand it. Even in our scientific age, we still cannot know everything there is. We cannot predict the wind 100 years from the day that we can have some measure of accuracy and prediction over the next week, but we still do not know the ways of the winds. And another incomprehensible mystery is the growth of a fetus. How do these bones grow into a womb? A fetus in the womb begins as a child, but begins as basically an egg without bones, without definitive features. They're just like they're basically a peanut in their early embryonic phase. But at some point in time in their development, in the embryo, bones do grow and come into place, and that is something that only God we can explain it only partially scientifically. Ultimately, it is that belongs to the province of God, and that's how he closes this verse. So if we do not know these things, then we cannot know the works of God who makes all, not in their entirety. That doesn't mean we cannot know some of his works, his will, and his way. It is only to say that to claim to have an exhaustive or total knowledge in the works of God, when none of us can explain the wind or the process of bone development in the womb, then none of us can certainly make the claim to know and understand and anticipate the ways and the works of God. He is beyond any explanation, and he taxes the comprehension, but we do have faith that he is an omnibenevolent creature who only wants what's best and is accomplishing a perfect plan, which may be painful to us, but is perfect for salvific history. Sow your seeds in the morning, and until evening do not let your hand rest, since you do not know which prosper, this or that, or whether both alike are good. So, there's a definite time and place to do the sowing, and that is the first thing in the morning. Farming is an up at the crack of dawn thing. As soon as the rooster crows, you get up there and you milk the cows and you spread and sow the seed. And, they do it night and day, because the more seed you spread, the more growth you can expect. So it's an all day, it'd be crack of dawn till the sun goes down, and even beyond that, do not let your hand rest. Be in perpetual motion and activity in order to expect and experience the greatest growth, the most abundant, fruitful harvest. And the mysteries of what seed is going to grow and which one isn't. There are so many external factors that can prevent a seed from growing. Some of them we read of in Matthew's 13th chapter, which have evangelical and analogies. Sweet also is the light, and good for the eyes to see the sun. Light is good because light is from God. God is light, but light is not God. Light is one of his attributes, which is distinct from a characteristic in that it's a characteristic that can be attributed to him as originating and emanating in him and from them. So God is light, but light is not God. God is more multifaceted than light alone. So, of course, light is sweet and good. But, the eyes to look at the sun, do not stare at the sun, because the laws of physics say that your eyes will grow blind in the process of trying to stare at the sun. But as a general principle, the light that exudes from the sun and God is good. and it brings joy and blessings. And light is also analogous to illumination, enlightenment, and illumination. But if a man lives many years, let him rejoice in them all. But let him remember the days of darkness, for they are many. All that is coming is futility. So here in the 7th verse, he transitions from business wisdom to just the call to make the most of life while you can, and to live a longevity of life. To be ancient in years was a blessing and a token, a sign and symbol of God's favor in the Old Testament and in the ancient world. But enjoy every one that you can while you can. Do not take life for granted. Remain grateful. Make the most of it while you can, and instead of fixating on what you don't have, be grateful for what you do have, because God does give us more than enough. And the days of darkness, this is nothing pleasant. This is nothing to look forward to. So all that is coming is futility. Solomon has a pessimistic and gloomy conception of death that suggests, at face value, at surface value, that there is no life after death. It is just darkness, which is analogous to non-existence and darkness. But in the 7th verse of the 12th chapter, he does bring himself to a belief in a spiritual resurrection. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. So he does bring himself ultimately to a faithful conclusion. But the distance between the opposite extremes are not too far distance, because we only have 2 more verses in the 11th chapter to cover. Rejoice, O young man, in your youth, and let your heart gladden you in the days of your youth, and walk in the ways of your heart and in the sight of your eyes. But know for all these God brings you into judgment. Solomon, the book of Ecclesiastes, record his most mature musings. The Song of Solomon was the youthful years. The middle years was the book of Proverbs. And according to the old adage, with age comes wisdom, then Ecclesiastes is unquestionably his masterpiece. So not that wisdom is the exclusive monopoly of the elderly, but even a foolish person is made wise as they advance in years. So how much more so is one who was wise when he was young, wise enough to ask for the endowment of wisdom that had guided him thus far, but had ultimately come to disappoint him as the twilight of his age. But the thing is that old people, they can tell us what youth is like, but you young people cannot tell us what old age is like. So we have to listen to them and take them seriously. Solomon is saying, enjoy it while it lasts, enjoy it while you can. This is a gift from God. God did not design life to be a joyless endurance race. He wants us to be happy. He wants us to enjoy what we are entitled to enjoy, the fruit of our labor. And the heart is the center of volition, will, and just desire and everything else. And in the sight of your eyes now, the sight of your eyes, Solomon on earlier occasions is guilty of walking by sight as opposed to by faith, 2 Corinthians 5:7. But use your eyes, but the fact that everything we do in this life, whether good or ill, brings judgment, results in judgment, does add meaning to what we do in this life. Whereas at earlier points he suggests, and this is connected to what we recently read, that this life is all we have, but we are going to be judged after it, he does. So the veering to the faith in the afterlife is actually much sooner than I alluded to. It comes in the verse after, but it gets more detailed in the 7th verse of the 12th chapter. So the incentive for judgment, it is a warning of judgment for the wicked, but it is also an invitation to the wise. The wise needn't fear judgment. They need not fear anything, any man, weapon, obstacle, because the fear of God, which is the axiomatic assumption of wisdom literature, is the fear that leads to wisdom, is the fear which eliminates and expels all lesser fears. It is the fear that puts all other fears into perspective and in their place. 10th and final verse, therefore remove wrath from your heart and put evil away from your flesh, for youth and dawn of life are futility. Wrath is the sure sign of a fool. I think he says somewhere earlier that by the quickness of his wrath, the fool is known, or that might even be in the book of Proverbs, but it is a mark and sign and dead giveaway of a foolish one who is intemperate, just responds intemperately, takes everything personally, and it has cause for anger. So the slightest thing will upset their wrath. But he's telling them to get rid of that stuff. While you are young, do not die. Life is too short to be angry all the time. Life is too short to be foolish, and it's going to be a lot shorter if you live foolishly. So if you are lucky enough to make it advanced in years, you can look back at youth with fond nostalgia. But he has the opposite. He says that it is futility in the twilight of his age, because it is a shadow in a distant memory from where he is writing at now. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye bye.